My phone buzzed on the counter while I was folding laundry, and the sound reverberated through the heap of clothing I was attempting to arrange. I picked it up after wiping my hands on my pants, and there it was, a message from Mom. "Hey, sweetie, just a heads up, Christmas is going to be simple this year. Money's tight, so we won't be doing big gifts, just the essentials." I tightened my hold on the plush cloth as I gazed at the inscription. It wasn't surprising to me. My parents had always celebrated Christmas in a frugal manner, never going crazy or overspending. However, there was something about this message that bothered me. It was more than just the words, it was the tone. Definitive, conclusive, as if someone had made a choice without consulting me. But what else could I say? I faked a grin as I answered, "Of course. No worries. The kids will understand." Even though David and I weren't very wealthy, we always made Christmas extra memorable for our twins, Lucas and Mia. Throughout the year, we conserved money by choosing considerate presents and carefully wrapping them, even if they weren't expensive. We created a beautiful atmosphere for Christmas. I put my disappointment aside and went on. Gifts weren't the point of family, were they? Being together was the main goal. I told myself that again, almost like a mantra, until I saw the pictures. It was a languid day, 2 days after Christmas. While David was repairing the dripping faucet that had been there since Thanksgiving, Mia and Lucas were occupied with their new toys. Just to kill time, I was browsing social media when my sister's post caught my attention. Slapped over a carousel of images, the caption said, "Best Christmas ever!" I clicked through them without even realizing I was holding my breath. The first picture was of my parents' living room, which had been turned into a scene from a Christmas magazine. It showed a huge tree with white lights shining on it, its limbs weighed down by gleaming gold and red decorations. Beneath it was a mound of presents, all wrapped in opulent paper of gold and silver. Sitting right in the middle, my sister's 2 girls were tearing into expensive footwear and brand new gadgets, with one of them holding a brand new tablet. As I gazed at the TV, my pulse raced. We were not invited. No one called or texted to announce a family get-together. Nothing. I checked the timestamp again, hoping it would be from the previous year, but it was from this Christmas. Something broke inside of me, like a delicate piece of glass breaking in two. We weren't just forgotten by my parents. They made a conscious decision to host a lavish party for my sister's family while excluding me and my children. I wasn't first struck by rage. I felt ill from the empty, horrible aching. As my nieces opened presents that appeared to be worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars, they didn't even consider Mia and Lucas. They had misled me about our significance to them as well as the money. I put my phone down on the table and locked it, my hands shaking. David hurried over and saw right away, his wrench clattering to the floor. With worry on his face, he said, "Hey, what's wrong?" I was unable to respond. I didn't think I could talk. I knew I would lose it there if I did. I couldn't look him in the eyes, so I gave him my phone instead. His jaw tightened with each swipe as he silently browsed through the pictures. "They didn't even tell us," I said in a hushed tone. "They had this huge celebration and we weren't even invited. They lied about being broke. They just didn't want us there." When I finally started crying, David drew me into his warm, solid hug. He said, "I'm so sorry," and kissed my forehead. "They don't deserve you, Daisy. They don't deserve the kids." That night, when David's breathing slowed into a gentle sleep pattern next to me, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. The deception, the treachery, and the way my parents always prioritized my sister were all things I couldn't stop reliving in my mind. It wasn't the initial instance. It wasn't even the 100th time, in fact. However, the fact that they not only injured me but also my children made this one more painful than the others. That's when I decided to do it. I grabbed my phone, went through my contacts, and banned each person's number one at a time. I was done allowing them to harm me, not out of resentment or malice. I had had enough of feigning ignorance about the repeated practice of selecting favorites. There was no sense of closure when I eventually put my phone down. It was raw and bleeding, like an open wound. I chose serenity over agony for the first time in my life, even though I knew it wouldn't heal quickly. I went with the family I created, not the one that was tearing me apart. One thought kept coming to me as I fell into a restless sleep, Sometimes the people who are meant to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the most. The days following Christmas seemed to go by in a cloud, like if I were breathing in heavy, oppressive air. Cooking, cleaning, and playing with Mia and Lucas were all things I did, but they all seemed pointless. The betrayal seemed like a burden I was unable to get rid of. David took note. He was constantly aware. He took my hand and squeezed it tenderly one evening as we put the children to bed. "You okay?" he inquired in a kind, cautious tone, as if he didn't want to break me any more than I was already broken. I forced a smile that stopped short of my eyes as I paused. I lied and kissed Mia's forehead before turning out the light. "Yeah, just tired," I said. Even though he didn't press, I could tell he didn't trust me. As I walked about the house, absorbed in my thoughts, I could feel his gaze on me. For how can you publicly declare that your own parents don't love you? How do you acknowledge that you were dismissed rather than simply left out? To at least act as though they cared, I continued waiting for them to get in touch. A call, a message, anything at all. I assumed my mother would at least attempt to diffuse the situation and offer some flimsy justification to lessen the severity of the situation. However, nothing was present, nothing but quiet. Then, like a warning sign, my sister's name appeared on my screen, and her call illuminated my phone. I let it ring. She gave another call, and once more. At last, a text message arrived. "I saw that you blocked Mom and Dad. What's wrong with you?" With my heart thumping in my ears, I gazed at the message. There was no "I'm sorry," no "can we talk?" Just a direct allegation, as if I had done something wrong. I resisted the need to toss the phone across the room by holding on to it until my knuckles grew white. David discovered me sitting on our bed's edge, holding my phone tightly as if it were about to shatter. With my voice barely above a gasp, I said, "They didn't even try to deny it." He put his arm around my shoulders and sat down next to me. Forcefully, "They knew what they were doing, Daisy," he remarked, "and they don't care that it hurt you." I wiped away a stray tear and let out a shaky breath. I keep trying to tell myself that maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they had a reason, I said. David squeezed me gently and shook his head. "Stop making excuses for them. They made a choice. They chose your sister, chose her kids, and they didn't give a damn how it would make you feel." He was correct. I knew it in my heart. I simply didn't want to acknowledge it. It was simpler to act as though there was a plausible explanation, a method to make sense of it. However, it didn't. It didn't. I eventually replied to my sister's message the next morning, typing with trembling hands. "They told me they couldn't afford Christmas gifts for the kids this year, but they could afford a full celebration for yours. They could afford luxury gifts, expensive decorations, and a party. But they couldn't afford to even invite us. Explain that to me?" She responded very immediately. "It's not a big deal, Daisy. Mom and Dad just wanted to do something nice for the girls." "You're overreacting, going overboard." I felt like I was slapped in the face by that term. As the reality descended upon me like a thick, oppressive blanket, I felt my stomach sink. It was more than simply Christmas. This had to do with their perception of me less than, an afterthought, the less important child. I quit faking for the first time in my life. I gave up trying to make sense of it all. Before drafting my last response, I took a long time to look at my sister's letter. "I hope your daughters had a great Christmas." Mine had to settle for small and simple, because that's what Mom and Dad told me we could afford. Now I know where I stand in this family. So do me a favor, don't contact me again. I blocked her as well, erased the thread, and pushed send. I was finished, not because I was upset or seeking retribution. I'm done pleading for crumbs of affection. They had made it obvious that I didn't matter to them, therefore, I'm done acting like I did. I shakily exhaled and set my phone down. I felt lighter for the first time since Christmas. Although I was still carrying the burden of their rejection, I was letting it go. The ensuing quiet wasn't consoling, rather, it felt eerie, as if I were waiting for something to happen. But it was also serene, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I found myself instinctively grabbing for my phone in the days that followed, anticipating a message from my parents, maybe even an apology. However, it never materialized. I had to confront the fact that they didn't regret it as the stillness dragged on. They were too indifferent to fix it. David came home from work one evening with a tense, irritated expression on his face as I was folding clothes once more. He approached me directly, planted a kiss on my forehead, and inhaled deeply. His statement, "Your dad called me at work today," made my heart sink. I inquired, already anticipating the response. "What did he say?" "He said he's worried about you, that you're acting irrationally by cutting off the family." Before I could stop myself, I let out a bitter chuckle. "I'm the irrational one, not the people who lied to me and excluded my kids from Christmas." David tightened his teeth and simply shook his head. "I told him you were done being treated like you don't matter." You know what he said? "You don't cut off family, no matter what." A slow, burning rage began to simmer beneath my skin, heated and seething. "No matter what?" I said again, trembling. "Even if family lies? Even if they hurt you? Even if they make your own kids feel worthless?" He gave a sad nod. "It's the same thing they've always done, expecting you to take whatever scraps they give while they prioritize your sister." The rage turned into something tougher and colder. My nails dug into my hands as I clenched my fists. It was more than simply Christmas. I was treated as if I didn't matter for the rest of my life. A lifetime of having to give up everything to a sister who always had it better. I had enough of keeping silent about it. I finished accepting it. I couldn't continue to act as though it didn't bother me, that every time they pushed me away, something inside of me broke. I was picking myself this time. I was picking up my children. I could hear Mia and Lucas laughing from their room as the early light filtered through the curtains. They were most likely rebuilding pillow forts. Coffee was being made by David, who was already up, and the place smelled rich and cozy. I just sat in bed for a while, allowing the stillness to fill me. But my thoughts wouldn't stop. In my mind, I kept repeating what Dad had said. No matter what, you never cut off familial ties. I couldn't stop poking at it. It was unpleasant and itchy, like a splinter beneath my skin. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, where David silently gave me a mug. He was aware. He was constantly aware. The icy knot of rage that was still in my chest did not melt even though I took a long sip and allowed the warmth to fill me. I said, partially to myself, "They'll never admit they did anything wrong." David leaned on the counter and simply nodded. "You already know that," he remarked softly. "They've never accepted accountability for their treatment of you. Not once." I fought the sting in my eyes by biting my lip. It's just, how can they believe they are nice people based on their own reflections? How do they defend it? In an attempt to protect me from the pain, David put down his cup and drew me into his embrace. People like that don't believe they're mistaken. They just make themselves the victims by rewriting the tale in their minds. I drew a trembling breath and closed my eyes, pressing my face to his chest. He was correct. This was not causing them to lose sleep. I was too busy being portrayed as the villain, the unreasonable, ungrateful daughter who dared to advocate for herself. My phone rang on the counter a few days later, right as I was beginning to get used to this new silence. When I looked at it and saw the name Aunt Carol, I almost moaned, Mom's elder sister. With my fingertips lingering over the screen, I paused, but something inside of me simply had to be aware. I clicked on the text. "Hey, Daisy, I just had a long talk with your mom. She's really upset, been crying over this whole thing. She doesn't understand why you're being so harsh. You know how much she loves you, right?" I felt I would break a tooth since my teeth were gripped so tightly. "Loves me?" I didn't want anything to do with this if it was love. My hands were shaking as I looked at the letter. Naturally, Mom had sobbed in front of Aunt Carol. As usual, playing the victim, attempting to portray myself as the irrational one. Using a cloth to wipe his hands, David entered from the backyard. His expression hardened as he took one look at my face. What took place? He narrowed his eyes as he perused the message on the phone I gave him. "It's unbelievable," he whispered. "She's painting you as the bad guy." I laughed without humor. "Because it's simpler to do that than to acknowledge their mistakes. God forbid they accept accountability." He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "You don't need to answer that. However, I desired to. I wanted to yell at Mom, Aunt Carol, and everyone else who believed that I should just lie over and accept it. However, I refused to give them the satisfaction and drank it down. Rather, I just responded. She's not upset because she hurt me. She's upset because I finally stood up for myself. If you can't understand that, then stop being her messenger." Before I could second-guess myself, I pressed send, threw the phone on the couch, and sat down next to it. David sat next to me, silently supporting me with his arm grazing mine. I no longer wanted to weep. I didn't want those who had never appreciated me to lead me to feel damaged. It wasn't over, though. Not even close. Another note arrived 2 days later, this time from Diane, an old acquaintance of my mom's. Someone I hadn't talked to in a long time. Curiosity overcame me, and I opened it. Daisy, I just wanted to reach out. Your mom is devastated. She doesn't know how things got so bad between you. She loves you and is heartbroken over what's happened. Can't you just talk to her? Life's too short for grudges. My jaw was gripped so tightly that it hurt when I gazed at the television. Resentments? Did they believe this to be that? Just me being a petulant child with a grudge? It wasn't resentment. It served as a border. I was shouting, "Enough, at last." I penned a single sentence. Only one. If she's heartbroken, it's only because she finally got treated the way she treated me. I felt a peculiar calmness come over me when I pushed submit. I owed them neither a rationale nor an explanation. I owed them nothing for my suffering. David discovered me sitting on the couch with my phone next to me, face down. I gave him a feeble grin and simply nodded as he raised an eyebrow. More journeys of guilt? He made a guess. Yep, I responded, a little too forcefully pronouncing the P. He lowered himself beside me and drew me to him. Are you all right? I gave it a lot of thought, and to my own surprise, I came to the conclusion that I was. Yes, I replied slowly. I believe I am, because I'm not waiting for people to care for the first time in my life. I no longer feel the need to win their approval. The way I've always treated them is not how I hope they'll treat me at last. I'm simply completed. He squeezed my shoulder and grinned. All right, you are worthy of that. I relaxed into his warmth as I leaned against him. He was correct. I was worthy of that. For once, I was choosing tranquility above the never-ending pain of waiting for others to show me the kind of love I needed. And I was unaware that I was lacking that true freedom. After a few weeks, the quiet turned into a cacophony in and of itself. I first kept reaching for my phone out of habit, partly expecting to hear from mom or dad or receive a message. I still harbored the hope that they would change their ways, acknowledge their mistake, and offer an apology. However, the more time passed in quiet, the more I realized that they weren't sorry. They have no intention of fixing it. I was grounded by David. He was a calm, steady presence who never forced me to speak before I was ready. I tried to convince myself that not everyone would treat me like a throwaway object by lying awake some nights and listening to his breathing. My phone buzzed on the counter one afternoon when David was at work and the children were at school. I was surprised to see Aunt Linda's name when I looked at the computer, the younger sister of my dad. She wasn't like the other members of the family. She didn't participate in the drama or show preference. She had always been nice, but we weren't very close. Nerves pounding in my chest, I paused before opening the mail. Hey, Daisy, I know things have been rough with your parents. I just wanted you to know that I see you. If you and the kids ever want to come over for dinner, my door's always open. Something sweet and painful blossomed in my chest as I gazed at the letter. No guilt trip or deceptive remarks meant to entice me back were used. Just a straightforward, sincere invitation. Thank you, I said, taking a long breath. That would be really nice. David and I packed Mia and Lucas into the vehicle and headed to Aunt Linda's place that weekend. With flower pots along the front steps and the aroma of something delectable emanating from the open windows, it seemed warm and inviting even if it wasn't as large as my parents' house. Linda pulled me into a strong hug as she greeted us at the door with a smile that stretched to her eyes. She leaned down to grin at the children after saying, "You made it," with warmth. I bet you two are freezing. I prepared hot chocolate, so come in. Lucas smiled and immediately followed Mia inside as her eyes brightened. As I watched them go, I could feel a knot slowly coming free inside of me. As David assisted the children with their outerwear, Linda escorted me to the kitchen. I put my hands around the cup she gave me and allowed the warmth to permeate my body. She looked at me thoughtfully for a long time. She replied softly, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I just wanted to let you know that I don't agree with what they did to you. I nodded, feeling a constriction in my throat. I said, They don't even believe they did anything wrong. Linda shook her head and moaned. Naturally, they don't. They have always been that way. They anticipate that everyone will accommodate them and pardon them without holding them responsible. Their sentiments have always come first, never yours. I forced back tears as I gulped. It's just. They did more than just injure me. My children were harmed by them. They allowed them to believe that since there was no other option, Christmas had to be modest and straightforward. They were hosting a fucking party for my sister's children in the meanwhile. She stretched out to grip my hand as her eyes grew softer. That's why you're acting appropriately. The finest thing you can do for your children is to shield them from those who only provide conditional affection. I drooped my shoulders in relaxation. So why is it still painful? She responded softly. Because you're a good person, Daisy. Good individuals never give up hope for improvement. However, there are instances when accepting that they won't change and giving up on them is the greatest thing you can do for yourself. I surveyed her comfortable kitchen, noting how she had greeted us without hesitation or condemnation. Perhaps I hadn't lost any relatives. Perhaps I had just discovered the people who truly merited the title. It was a simple dinner, full of stories and laughs. There was a lot of yelling and laughter when Linda's husband allowed Mia and Lucas to make up the rules for the board games they played. David seemed more at ease than he had in weeks, and I couldn't help but smile a bit. I didn't feel the need to prove myself to anyone for the first time in a long time. I didn't feel like the one who had to make do with crumbs of affection or the backup daughter. That wasn't how Linda saw me. To her, I was simply family. And that was plenty. The children, exhausted from playing, slept out in the back seat on the way home. David's thumb brushed my knuckles as he reached across and gripped my hand. Are you all right? He inquired quietly. I took a long breath and looked at him, then at the children in the mirror. Yes, I muttered. I believe I am. Perhaps family was more than just blood. Perhaps it had to do with the individuals who came up, who loved you unconditionally, and who created room for you without requiring you to ask. Slowly, spring arrived, erasing the bitter cold of winter. It brought with it an odd realization that I was no longer furious. I wasn't anticipating resolution. I'd given it to myself already. I didn't look forward to a big gesture or an apology every morning to make things right. Whether or not they understood why I left didn't matter to me. When I at last comprehended it myself, Mia entered the kitchen one afternoon with a contemplative expression on her face as I was preparing lunch for the children. Will we ever get to see Grandma and Grandpa again, Mommy? She inquired. I stopped, used a dish towel to wipe my hands, and lowered myself to her level. I was honest when I said, I don't know, baby. Lucas's little inquisitive face peered in from the doorway. Are you missing them? I gave it some thought, allowing the question to truly affect me. No, I muttered. I miss the things I believed we had, but I'm even more in love with what we now have. Mia gave me a little nod, as if she understood in that quiet, sage way children do. All right, she stated plainly, and that was plenty. I came to a realization as I watched them dash off to play. I wasn't hoping that my parents would alter for the first time since Christmas. I wasn't clinging to the notion of a non-existent family. I was simply living. And that was the greatest peace I could have ever hoped for, I told myself. A year passed, and throughout that time, I created something superior to the family I had lost. I created a life that was full of respect, love, and honesty. With those who came to see me, I created new customs. Above all, I stopped hoping for affection from individuals who had previously demonstrated their unwillingness to offer it to me. The children thrived. Lucas joined a little soccer league, while Mia began attending painting lessons at the community center. David coached whenever he could, and it warmed my heart to see him out there with Lucas, beaming from ear to ear. This new existence was tranquil. No more doubting myself. No more being cautious. No more holding out hope for an unattainable goal. However, fate threw me another curveball just when I believed I had completely moved on from the family that decided to throw me out. A note was discovered in the mailbox in late February, sandwiched between junk mail and invoices. David held it up as if it were tainted and brought it in. I immediately recognized who it came from. There was no mistaking my mother's handwriting. Are you interested in reading it? David inquired in a circumspect tone. After giving the envelope a lengthy look, I shook my head. No. I tossed it in the garbage without thinking twice. David seemed nearly impressed as he lifted an eyebrow. Isn't that simple? I nodded and smiled slightly at him. Yes. Yes, it is. For many years, I had persuaded myself that family was forever and that I had to stay with my parents no matter how many times they chose my sister over me because that was the way it was meant to be. But I was aware of the reality now. DNA isn't about family. It's about the individuals who give you a sense of safety, affection, and visibility. My parents had demonstrated throughout their lives that they were not those individuals. When Easter weekend arrived, I felt free to contact my parents for the first time. Rather, we stayed at Aunt Linda's place for the day. While Linda and I sat on the porch sipping coffee and enjoying the sunshine, the children went around the backyard looking for Easter eggs. With a gentle smile, Linda remarked, "This is nice. Having relatives present." I took a drink of my coffee and nodded. Yes. Yes, it is. She paused for a second, her eyes looking at me with a hint of hesitation. Daisy, I'm aware that things are different. I am aware that you most likely still miss them in some capacity. I gave it some thought, allowing her words to sink in. Have I overlooked them, or was it the parents? I had always imagined them to be that I missed, instead of the ones they were. I inhaled deeply and let the warm wind lift the burden that had been pressing so heavily on my chest. No, I answered plainly, I don't. And I realized for the first time that it was true. I did something that I hadn't done since Christmas that evening. After we arrived home and put the kids to bed, I took out the old photo albums that I hadn't looked at in years from the closet. I could plainly see my sister at the center of every family gathering, grinning and surrounded by love and care. As I turned page after page, me usually off to the side a little. Never the priority, but always present. She received a larger celebration on her birthday. I recently acquired her old bike, and she bought a brand new one. Dance performances at which my parents proudly smiled and hardly acknowledged my certificate of honor roll status. A lifetime of coming in second. I had been convincing myself for years that it wasn't deliberate, and that perhaps I was just dreaming. However, I wasn't dreaming. I pulled pictures out of the album one by one and piled them up. Just acceptance, not resentment or wrath. I no longer had to cling to those recollections. I wasn't pleased with them. I didn't find peace with them. After finishing, I placed the pictures in a box and put them on the closet's highest shelf. Out of sight and out of memory, I had given up trying to cling on. I wasn't anticipating an unanswered phone call or an unfulfilled apology. I finished glancing back. Mia walked into the kitchen the following morning, wiping sleep from her eyes as I packed the kids' lunches. With a little inquisitive voice, she questioned, "Mommy, will we ever see Grandma and Grandpa again?" I stopped and stared down at her innocent little face, oblivious to the seriousness of that query. I was honest when I said, "I don't know, baby." With his beloved plush dinosaur in his hand, Lucas went in after her. "Are you missing them?" He tilted his head in question. I considered it. Have I overlooked them? The truthful response was easier than I anticipated. No, I muttered. I miss the things I believed we had, but I'm even more in love with what we now have. Mia nodded, as if she knew more than I thought she did. She gave me a little grin and murmured, "Okay," before rushing to grab her backpack. Lucas trailed behind, and that was sufficient. As the months went by, I saw subtle changes in myself. I was able to laugh more readily and wasn't burdened by a persistent sense of disappointment. I was anticipating another guilt trip, so I didn't flinch when my phone buzzed. I gave up worrying if they will ever get in touch with me again. It was no longer relevant, because I had given up on that hope. I had no intention of waiting for the individuals who were meant to adore me to arrive. I wasn't going to sacrifice my tranquility for anything since I had chosen it. As spring gave way to summer, David and I watched the children in the yard chase fireflies from the porch one warm evening. He extended his arm to grasp my hand and inserted his fingers into mine. He smiled gently at me and remarked, "You seem lighter lately." I squeezed his hand and smiled back. Because I am. I no longer waited for the kind of affection I needed from others. With you and the children, I created my own family. Additionally, that's plenty for me. David's lips were warm on my skin as he moved in to plant a kiss on my temple. "You know I'm proud of you." I laid my head on his shoulder and enjoyed the evening dance of the fireflies. I wasn't plagued by the memories of my deceased relatives for the first time in my life. I felt appreciative of the family I had chosen, and that had chosen me in return. Because pleasure, not rage or bitterness, was the finest form of retaliation, and I had located it at last.